Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are on this planet Earth. And we have another interesting and exciting session with WOWSA Live. Ned, take it away.
My name is Ned Denison. I'm going to be your host. I'm a epic marathon swimmer with more than 50 big swims to my name. I've also done a couple of ice miles, and I'm currently the chairman of the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame. I'm going to ask Patrick now to introduce himself, but his introduction should be 4 or 5 times as long as mine. Do not be shy. Tell us some things.
Okay. I'm from New Zealand. I'm a Kiwi. I've lived in London for about over 25 years. I'm a journalist by training, but I've diversified into filmmaking, documentary filmmaking, and hence the conversation. I'm also a lifelong outdoor swimmer. I lost the passion growing up in New Zealand. I grew up swimming in the cold alpine rivers of the South Island's west coast. So I'm quite used to it, but then I found out I've loved with it in my 20s and 30s, and I've only really rediscovered it in the last 10 years. Yeah. And it's something that has become very necessary for me. I've done a couple of marathon swims, but it's more the enjoyment of the cold water than the marathon eventing for me.
So I had the privilege of watching your movie yesterday. And I watched it all the way to the end, so I got the kind of full frontal nudity towards the very end, which was an unexpected something. Give us some background on how that all came to be and how you chose that place. I've not personally been there, but I've been swimming in the Serpentine, which is kind of the home of marathon swimming in London.
Yep.
And I've swum in the Tooting Bec Lido, which is kind of the home of cold water competition swimming in London.
Yeah. So the Hampstead ponds they've been swum in since the time of Keats and Constable. So they've been swum in for 200 years. There's paintings by Constable and of people bathing in the sort of early 1800s. So we've got a very long history of swimming. The essence of the documentary was basically because no one else had done it, and I was actually amazed that these swimming ponds in the centre of London that are still gender segregated. That's a really interesting point of difference, because the Serpentine is a wonderful swimming location, but the nature of the gender segregation, having a ladies' pond and a men's pond, gives them a very distinct character. And they're notorious. Well, notorious is possibly the wrong word, but they're well known for kind of, being epicenters of, feminist culture and gay culture. So that adds another kind of dimension, even though it's not fully addressed in the film, but that's another part of the intrigue. And, there's just got a really amazing history and culture around them.
So before we dive into all of that, how do you go about making a documentary film? Do you just go out and make it and then try to sell it later, or you go gather up some sponsors and some backers before you do it? How does this work?
Good question. We thought, myself and my co-producer, Samuel Smith, who's also a very good friend, we were working on another documentary. It was about noise, but it spun out of control. It was getting too big for us, and we didn't have the budget for this. So we decided that we needed another project that was going to be, had 3 rules. Had to be a fixed location, had to be a fixed duration, and had to be very good stories. And I was just having a swim in the Parliament Hill Lido. A lot of your audience will know about Parliament Hill Lido. It's a beautiful swimming pool, public pool in North London, 60 meters long with a beautiful stainless steel base, cold water. And I was just having a swim there one day, and I suddenly thought, the ponds, I wonder if anyone's made a documentary about the ponds. And I basically, as soon as I had that thought, I raced home and I spent a couple of hours on Mr. Google and just typing in variations of Hampstead Heath swimming film, Hampstead Ponds film. Couldn't find anything, and so I got really quite excited by that because I thought there's a real story to be told. So the next thing I did was I went to see the head of swimming on Hampstead Heath, and I just basically said to him, look, I've got this idea, what do you think of it? And he could quite easily have just said, no, it's not going to happen. But fortunately, he did the opposite. He said, yeah, it's a great idea. We have a lot of people interested in telling that story, but you're the first person that's come along with a kind of like a professional approach. And he kind of just thought that myself and Sam were coming from the right place. We weren't trying to go for anything sensationalist, about the gay culture, anything like that. It was just going to be about the swimming, the fascination the swimmers have with the cold water, and especially going year round. So, it snowballed from that, really. Once we got that permission, we went and filmed a taster for a crowdfunding campaign, and we didn't money, we didn't quite hit the target, but we got enough to start filming. And in our naivety, we thought, once we start filming this, it's got such a great story that millionaires will come and invest in it. Of course, that didn't happen. So we finished up, filming the whole year and making the film on the smell of an oily rag. And we called in a lot of favors. We had a lot of people working on deferred fees, which is quite a common thing in independent filmmaking. Is someone will agree to work for you, and if you make money from the film or the program, you pay them then. And fortunately, all the people that we had working for us, and there's 4 very key characters who worked for us, we were able to pay them. So at the end of the process, it was really good.
And how have you put the film out there? Are you in festivals, or how does it work?
Well, once we started filming, we didn't have a production company, a distribution company. We didn't have an executive producer at that point. But I was confident that we were going to make a good film. It was going to be an interesting film. So I thought the process, we would find someone at a certain point who would be right for us. And we did. About halfway through filming, halfway through the year, I managed to beat down the door of a man called Christopher Hurd, who's a quite influential independent producer in the UK. And he's been behind a lot of great films, a lot of great documentaries, and getting him on side, he agreed to be executive producer, and his company agreed to distribute the film when it was finished. So that was really key to the success. The next thing, and this is the wonderful thing about the swimming community, and you chaps will know this, is that the swimming community is very supportive. And I know film is about cold water swimming, year-round swimming on Hampstead Heath, in the ponds on Hampstead Heath. I knew that it was going to appeal to other swimmers, beyond that. It wasn't just going to be a local kind of phenomenon. And so I started getting in touch with swimming groups, outdoor swimming groups around the UK, and the response was brilliant. But this was finished editing the film before we had a film, and there was just so much interest in the film that by the time we came to to have the finished film and to get it out there, there was already a community waiting to watch it. Also another key ally for us was the Outdoor Swimming Society.
I do.
OSS? Yeah. So Kate Rue, a supporter from the first day, and so having them on board made it very
Patrick, we're
easier.
getting a huge scratching or crackling. Is it coming from your end?
I can't. No, I can't.
Okay.
Maybe if I take the earpiece out.
Much better.
Can you hear me?
It must be the connection somehow to the earpiece.
Yeah. Okay. Is that going to be a problem for
No,
the
it's
previous
perfect.
one?
It's perfect.
Okay, okay. Yeah, so having Kate Rue on board and the Outdoor Swimming Society was always also a great way of spreading the gospel, basically. So when we came to release the film, we managed to get it into a cinema in North London, in Hampstead, the Everyman Hampstead, for one night.
Okay.
And a curious thing happened. That one night sold out like within a day. And so the Everyman put on another couple of screenings, and those two screenings sold out immediately. And it was just basically the Everyman it's an art house cinema chain in the UK, and they told me that they've never had more inquiries about a single film in the history of me. So it was remarkable. It really was. It was it was really gratifying, but also quite surprising, because I was confident there was a swimming community who would watch the film and enjoy the film. But what I'm surprised about is the people who are not swimmers, who are also getting a lot out of it.
It's interesting. We have an Everyman Theatre in Cork, Ireland.
Okay.
And I've been there, I think, 4 times in my life, and twice was when there was a swimming film showing.
Okay, right.
Which no one ever would have heard of anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
But 1 or 2 swimmers figured it out and put the word out, and we packed the cinema, and obviously went for a few drinks afterwards. So you should look up the Everyman in Cork and let me know. We'll try to fill it for you.
I will do so.
So let me give you some impressions of the film and try to set the stage. Yeah. So the heath and the ponds are clearly a beautiful location. Mm-hmm. That actually features about 1% in the film. The location itself is relatively unimportant. It's a tough place to lifeguard, in that the water is clearly dark. And I guess the other big impression that I have is I've never seen more people breaststroking and chatting in my entire life. And I'm used to open water swimmers who meet up, insult each other a bit, for a long swim, freestyle, come back. There's a bit of a race to get back to wherever it is, followed by some cups of tea, and off we go.
Yeah.
And this was clearly a whole different cadence of friends meeting, and that the chatting doesn't stop when they get in the water.
No.
It kind of starts then. Very few bathing caps, and a whole lot of people with bare heads breaststroking, calmly and serenely in the water, regardless of the temperature.
Yeah.
And then you showed a couple of clips of the summer where it's absolutely packed. and the entire scene changes from this peaceful bohemian escape place in North London to an unbelievably crowded summer location with just there were a couple of people saying their towel was too big. They had to shorten the towel because they were taking too much space.
Yeah. That's correct, and Tom, the American guy who's one of the main characters in the film, he says that, doesn't he? His group, the East German ladies swimming team, they fall away when it comes to the summer. They don't like the summer, because they from May through to August, they start disappearing, and they'll have 25 to 30 guys swimming together, this group, on a Saturday and Sunday morning. In January, but when it comes to July, there'll be like 5, 6 will turn up on a Saturday morning, and the regular year-round swimmers, they fall away at the summertime, because a lot of reasons, but the water gets too warm for them. They don't like the 20, last year was ridiculous. It was like getting up to 25, 26 degrees, the water temperature. And a lot of people have been sunbathing, and they've got, suntan lotion on, and they lose that in the water. So the water gets really murky in the middle of summer. So it's not as pleasant. But, when they have this thing called the ropes coming in and the ropes going out. Okay. So the ropes come in for the winter perimeter, which is about half the size of the summer perimeter, when the water falls below 12 degrees centigrade. And that's when the real swimmers love it. I mean, the perimeter is so much smaller to swim around, but the water temperature, there's fewer people there. They really love it. To speak to your point, some channel swimmers do actually use it for channel training. You know, London-based channel swimmers, they use it for training, but very much at specific times, and they you know, you obviously can't do that when it's crowded. But you're right. I mean, the ponds are very social places. They're not for serious training. You can do that. I mean, you can if you pick your time, and certain people do. You can get in the water and have a good, you know, 45-minute, 1 hour swim without, you know, encountering too many people if you swim, you know, at certain points in the morning or whatever. But it's very much a community of people who just love the cold water buzz. You know, it's about, some of them, you know, they're like tea bags, you know, they dunk in, and so
we call them dippers.
Dippers, yeah.
And we don't do it in a pejorative way. We say,
Yeah.
look, there are people who come in and do big sets, or people who swim. We have an island, they swim out and back the island, and there are people who dip, and we have 3 ladies who exactly do what they do with the Heath. They come in. They don't have goggles, they don't have caps, and they do a breaststroke up and back and chat and talk about all their problems and worries, and you know, we imagine they're talking about how attractive we are, but probably not. You know,
no, that's probably that's just the opposite.
This history of separate male and female bathing. We have a couple of situations in Ireland that are similar. There's an old-time bathing site, and there's a male and a female area separated by a headland. Now, it's only a couple of 100 meters between them, and now the male and female distinction has gone away. They're still labeled the male and female, but they're mixed. And then interestingly, in Dublin, there's a very successful series of summertime races. And there must be 250 men, 150 women that compete, 25 summer. It's usually a 1 mile race. And it's handicapped, which means the slowest person starts off, and about 45 minutes later, the fastest person starts. And it's the first to finish. And when I first went up there, you know, you clearly notice that the men they're not in the water at the same time as the women. And one of the women said to me, she said, you know why that is, don't you? And I, just with my best American accent, I said, I presume that's just because the women can't stop touching the men in the water. And but it is fascinating that they've separated the men and the women, and there's the 1 day a week where are the women allowed to use the men's, or is it mixed?
No. So it's interesting because, you know, swimming, the history of swimming in England and Britain was very much upper class kind of pursuit. You know, in the 19th century, there was boys at public schools who were the swimmers, and not many other people knew how to swim. And they are the kind of people who first started swimming on the Heath. So, you know, the women would come along and watch the men folk, you know, the upper class men folk bathe and splash around. And at a certain point, they got a bit sick of that and started agitating to have access to the pond that the men were swimming in. And I think the men relented, and might have been the 1870s, around that time, and they got 1 day a week. The ladies were allowed to swim 1 day a week at the pond the men were using, and that continued that way for a number of decades until the 1920s, when the women finally got the ladies' pond. And you know, it's funny, it's an anachronism in the 21st century that you've got gender segregated swimming ponds, but I tell you what, the people who swim there would fight to the death to maintain them, because the women who swim at the ladies' pond, that's why they swim there, because it's only women. And the men who swim at the men's pond, 95% of them will say the same. We love this place because, you know, we're just men being together, you know, and that gives it its unique character. Some people have, you know, there have been some sort of movements about moving away from that because, you know, it is kind of a bit out of date, but I hope it will never change. and all the regular swimmers feel the same. Yeah.
It's interesting in San Francisco at the South End Rowing Club, for example, there's a common clubhouse in a common area,
Yeah.
and the men and women swim together. But the part of the highlight for me is there's a men's only sauna,
Okay.
and the conversation's a little different than if it was mixed.
Yeah.
And then we were talking to somebody about Geneva a few minutes ago, and in Geneva, the sauna is a giant mixed sauna.
Right. Yeah.
And the predominant languages are French and English, but it's a very different atmosphere when it's mixed. Did you have anything like this in New Zealand of segregation of the sexes for swimming?
No, I've never encountered that anywhere, to be honest. No, it's just. I think there are there are pools that have women only sessions.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's quite common, but to actually have a whole swimming venue location devoted to women, I've never encountered that personally myself. I've been in contact with the ladies at the Coogee ladies baths in Sydney. Do you know about those?
Mm-hmm.
So I've kind of had some contact with them. That's the only other kind of like natural, so to speak, swimming pond or swimming spot that I've come across that is women only. There could be others, but
Steve, why don't you join us, Steve, and tell us about your invasion of the ladies only pearl diving location in Japan, and is there anything else in Japan that would fit into this model?
Yeah, so Patrick, I had the opportunity to visit the area in Japan, not too far away from the major cities where they have the pearl divers.
Right.
And me, a visiting American, I had no idea that pearl divers was exclusively Japanese. So me as an open water swimmer, I saw an open coastline.
Yeah.
I dove in the water, swam around. I saw these pearl divers over there. So I swam over with my goggles and just sunk to the bottom and was just looking at them doing their thing.
Yeah.
And in the middle, they're telling me, go away, go away, go away, underwater.
Yeah.
I didn't understand. So I came up and I thought, oh, maybe somebody's watching them. So I came up to the surface. I looked around. There was nobody there. So I went back down and was just watching them, with doing their thing. Again, they, oh, no, go away, go away. And I came up, I figured, something's wrong. So I just swam to shore. And this little old Japanese man comes up to me and he yells at me, no man, no man. And I speak Japanese. So I replied back to him in Japanese. I said, what do you mean, no man? And then he explained to me in Japanese, men are not supposed to swim here with the women. And I apologized, I bowed, and I left. But, that was pearl diving in Japan obviously has a special culture. And, with your film and what you've done, this location also has a special culture, special place. Now, I'm from California. And if you could explain to me, it's like, where is it located? How big is it? Sort of set the scene for someone who hasn't seen the film yet.
Okay, great. That's a good question. So Hampstead Heath is quite remarkable because it's in central London. I think it's about 4 kilometres from Oxford Street, which is the main shopping area of London. And Hampstead Heath is 320 hectares in size. So it's absolutely, it's huge for a city park, and it's wild, very rugged, and it's deliberately left untamed and large areas of forest. And the ponds themselves, there's 18 ponds on the heath, but there's only 3 of them to swim in. And then these ponds are in the small lakes. They were originally created sort of in the, I think it was in the 17th century that they were first created as water reservoirs, drinking water for the Hampstead residents. And they started being swum in the 19th century. The men's pond, I would estimate, is the size of probably about 3 football fields. So it's quite sizable. You know, it's more a lake than a pond. You know, the ladies' pond is probably half that size. So it's a lot smaller, and it's enclosed in trees. So it's very private, which is another reason the ladies love it so much, is because you know, they can go there and they think, you know, they can feel like they're in their own little world. The men's pond is exposed, so you can be out having a swim, diving off the diving board, which is something the ladies are jealous of because the men have got a diving board and they haven't. And we get a lot of people just, you know, kind of watching us from the side and just, you know, curious as to why these crazy people are swimming with ducks and geese in the middle of January, you know. And the mixed pond, which is only open from May until the start of September, that is probably a little bit smaller than the ladies' pond. And that's on the other side of Hampstead Heath. So the ladies and the men's pond are on the east side, and the mixed pond is on the west side. And yeah.
Got it. And then
Yeah.
and the people who, so you have the setting. Can you just give us one or two of the characters and sort of their background?
Look, it's remarkable. You know, the ladies' pond is managed, well, it's run by the City of London Corporation, which is a civic body. But the unofficial management committee of the ladies' pond is called the Kenwood Ladies Pond Association, and they don't have any rights in law, but they, you know, they do kind of run the show. They're like a club, and they work in conjunction with the lifeguards. Men's pond is very different. There's about 4 or 5 different associations, groups of men, all with different characters, and I was really fortunate because during filming, the oldest sports club on Hampstead Heath, and it's one of the oldest, I think it's one of the oldest swimming clubs in the country. It's called the Highgate Lifebuoys, and they've got their own little hut, which is just beside the main changing area. And that's important because it's got a radiator in it. So in the middle of January and February, it's absolutely wonderful to go for a swim and then just kind of come in and cuddle the radiator for 10 minutes while you try and warm up. But I got invited to join the Highgate Lifebuoys halfway through filming, which is a rare honour because they're the original sports club, and they've got a long and rich history, and there's only 60 members at any one time, because it's only a little hut, so there's only a certain amount of space. So the waiting list is quite long. So for me to get invited on it was a real honour. And the characters in there are legends, some of them. One of them is features in my film, and it's a chap called Chris Rocco. He's a top amateur boxer in his youth. He's now in his mid-70s. And he's also a highly skilled tailor. So he makes suits for a living, and he's still making suits, although he's not very well at the moment, Chris. So it's quite unfortunate because he's not been able to swim for a long time. Chris is an absolute legend, because you'll see in my film, he tells a few stories, but you see him also, he plays the trumpet, and he plays it particularly badly. So on Christmas Day, he'll be up there playing for the Christmas Day races. He'll be up there playing the trumpet, you know, like excruciatingly badly, but no one has the heart to tell him to stop. And he runs the Highgate Lifebuoys. He's the chairman, and yeah, he runs a tight ship, and he decides pretty much who gets invited in. So I wouldn't say it's like the mafia, but the membership ritual is a little bit unusual. The East German ladies swimming team, an unusual bunch, because even they're called the East German ladies, even though they're men. And the reason they're called that is because Tom, who's also another character in my film, he started swimming after his emerged from a coma after his bus crash. He got run over by a bus, I should say. And Tom, basically, you know, part of his recovery, his neighbor was a cold water swimmer, a legend called Al Alvarez. And he suggested to Tom that he said to Tom, he said, look, Tom, I think you should get in the pond. I think it's going to help you, and if a bus isn't going to kill you, then the cold water isn't effing going to kill you either. So Tom took his advice, and he's basically swum every day from that day, and that was I think it was like 11 years ago now. And Tom became an evangelist for the cold water swimming, and he invited one of his mates down to have a swim with him one day. So they went and had a swim, stood up on the jetty, got the lifeguard or someone to take a photo of him, and he took it home and excitedly showed his wife, and she said, "Oh my God, you look just like the East German ladies swimming team from the 1976 Olympics." So if you remember Cornelia Ender.
Yes.
So they thought, well, that's a great brand, and so they set up this club, and it's a bit Monty Python-esque. They're pretty light-hearted. They have a strong and peculiar sense of humour, and they're not to everyone's taste. They do irritate some of the other swimmers because they're quite noisy, but it's all about the camaraderie. They go down there, they have their swim, they hang out, they talk. There's the cold water, and that's the message of my film. Is the cold water is such a great bonding, kind of new way of bonding that it kind of encourages people to kind of get in the water, because you're going to make new friends, and you guys will know that. Whether it's marathon swimming, whether it's just dipping. It brings people together, and so the various clubs, kind of are emblematic of that. Yeah.
I'd add one thing to that. Everywhere I've ever done open water swimming, there's what I describe as pods of swimmers, like dolphins. Pods of swimmers.
Yeah.
And it's the people who swim at 6 o'clock in the morning are different than the pod that swims at 6:15.
Yeah.
The 8 o'clock ones are completely different, and the ones that swim at 11 o'clock every day are typically retired, or in the summer they're teachers.
Yeah, yeah.
And each pod has its own characters, its own core group of 2, 3, 4, 10, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And I think when it's a great location, the individuals can move around. If a 6:15 person shows up at 6 o'clock, they're welcome. They just they just join in and everything. Yeah. I think the thing that makes that location and that culture a little bit different is that the podding continues while they're swimming, because they're chatting doing breaststroke. Not all of them, but there's a huge element of that. Whereas in a lot of other locations, you meet, you swim, you have a chat for 10 seconds at the far buoy because it's cold, and you want to make sure everybody's with you, and you turn around, come back, and everybody has a chat afterwards. But it's all the same characters. You could put them in a different location, and they'd be absolutely fine. They'd fit right in. It would just be the 7:30 a.m. group at Laguna on Thursday mornings or something.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. I mean, the early morning swimmers, obviously, they've got to race into the city. They tend to be city workers, and they're there waiting for the lifeguards to open up at 7 o'clock in the morning so they can have their swim. And, it's about power. It's about getting in the water, having that thrash out, and then getting to the office. But as you say, different times, different people, and I tend to swim around lunchtime. And so I'm always encountering the same sort of chaps, and they all tend to be retired. I work from home, and I don't live too far from Hampstead Heath, so it's like the perfect time for me, because there's not so many people swimming, and I can go and have a chat. And I've got to know the chaps, who swim there at that time quite well now. And it's you're absolutely right. Different times, and there is overlap. There is some overlap.
Mm-hmm.
Some people belong to more than one group, and they will swim, depending on their mood and their schedule for the day. So it is quite interesting. Another interesting thing about my experience with the film, because the swimming community around the UK really picked up my film and turned screenings into events. what I've discovered, and I don't know whether you chaps have also encountered this, was that increasingly in the last number of years, I don't know whether it's 10 years or maybe longer, but outdoor swimming is becoming an increasingly a female activity. And it might be different for marathon swimming, but in terms of the new social constructs that, that are forming around outdoor swimming, it's about 2/3 female and about 1/3 male in Britain. So that's been a really interesting, discovery. And a lot of the screenings that I held around Britain were heavily weighted towards females.
I think I had a little bit of involvement with the Outdoor Swimming Society, it's called.
That's it, yeah.
And I met Kate Rue several times. She came with us to a Dover Channel dinner. And like Steve Munatona, she's also an award winner from the International Swimming Hall of Fame.
Right.
So she's quite well known. And it's interesting, the events are a mix. So I see you've done the dart swim.
Yes.
Now, it's not something that I've done, but we're talking about thousands of people going down this reasonably small river. A few of them are like the 3 Ethiopians in the front of the Beta Breakers who were trying to win the race.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a few people in the middle that just don't want their brother-in-law to beat them.
Yeah.
And there's a tremendous number of people who are out for the experience of the day. They're checking out the kingfisher birds, and they're hoping to see an otter, and they're just having a great time. So I think one of the things that Britain has done very well is to mix the sort of elite competitive with the enjoyment in the same kind of event.
Yeah.
And Steve, you'd know better than I in places like California, but the events that I've done in California, the sort of Santa Cruz swim around the pier kind of thing, there's not a lot of people in the back having a chat.
Yeah.
Everybody seems to have their goggles on and racing more than experiencing.
Yeah. It's interesting, they dart. That's a wonderful swim. I trained quite hard for it, and I was going to leave it all out there, as they say. I really wanted to, and so I put myself. I didn't know how fast I was, and there's 3 waves. There's the elite, as you say, and there's the medium, and then there's slow. I don't think they called it slow because I think they had some other term. I can't, might be leisurely or something. And I didn't know what group I should go in, but I put myself in the middle because I thought that was safest. But I trained quite hard for it, and I'm from New Zealand, so it's a rugby country. Okay, and I noticed in my group of swimmers was Josh Lucy, who was the England winger, and when they won the World Cup rugby final in 2003. So that was inspiration for me to swim as hard as I can because I wasn't going to let him beat me. So
I suspect your New Zealand accent came out even stronger when you said hello.
Yeah, exactly. I did chat to him afterwards. I didn't mention that I beat him by 15 minutes, but I did make sure I said hello to him. He looked in a bad way, really, because he's a rugby player. Rugby players haven't really got swimmers' physiques, have they? They're too dense or something. I don't know what it is, but he looked beaten. But
their muscles are such that their arms aren't supposed to go over their head.
yeah, true. The River Dart is a wonderful swim, and I'd love to do it again. And as you say, there are a lot of great swims around Britain over the summer. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, the Outdoor Swimming Society are busy, obviously postponing those events and dealing with, refunding tickets and things like that. So it's kind of devastated that activity for 12 months, which is a real shame.
So you mentioned Parliament Hill, which I've also swum in. It's kind of like swimming in a big aluminum or aluminium container, because it's literally stainless steel, which is such an unusual surface. And it has maybe a 40 Bohemian twist to it.
Yeah.
Have you swum in the Serpentine or the Tooting Bec or the other locations in London? And can you compare your impressions of the atmosphere?
Yeah, I know. I mean, I swam in most pools in London, and the Serpentine I've only ever swum in once. And you know, people love the Serpentine, and you know, it's. I find, for me personally, I find it's just a little bit too exposed, and I think there's just too many people around there. But you know, people who swim there regularly love it, and you know, good luck to them. You know, we all have our own private preferences. The Tooting Bec Lido is great. You know, you just lose yourself. It's almost 100 meters long, isn't it? It's extraordinary for a swimming
90 or something.
Yeah, it's extraordinary for a swimming pool. So that's really quite a special place, you know, and it's a good place where you can go and lounge out. You know, got some wonderful, you know, sunbathing places. So yeah, I think Parliament Hill Lido, its natural sibling is a pool called at Brockwell Park, the Brockwell Lido, which is a famous in Britain. Lido it was built by the same Lido designers. So what happened in Britain in the 1920s and 1930s? There was a wave of Lido building because the government didn't want, you know, they wanted to be prepared for any, you know, other war. So they didn't want to be in the situation they were in 1914. And so they decided that they needed to improve the national physique. So they basically subsidized local councils to build swimming pools around the country. And it was incredible. You know, by the start of the Second World War, there were 300 Lidos or public swimming pools around Britain. So Brockwell Park is made by the same designers as Parliament Hill. So it looks very similar. So you can almost, you know, they're not quite identical, but from a distance they are. And certainly the vibe inside is very, very similar. And yeah, you're right. You know, there's a thing about Lido culture. I don't know what it's like in the States or in Ireland, but there's a thing about Lido culture where people go and spend the day, you know, and they all have cafes, and you know, people go and take books, and you know, they just, you know, they go with friends and they have a picnic there and they spend the whole day. It's a wonderful, wonderful place, and you know, I'm really delighted that it's coming back into fashion. And in fact, my next documentary is going to be about the rebirth of the British Lido, and its working title is Splash Palace. And at the moment, there are a number of campaigns around Britain which community-led, so it's people-powered politics, where communities are uniting and basically winning back the asset control of the disused Lidos, and they're fundraising and basically trying to reopen their Lidos. And yeah.
Our last guest, Jamie Monahan, is an ice swimmer of some repute. I met her about 2 months ago in Dublin. There was a swim that was supposed to be an ice swim, but it was too warm, so it became a nice swim. But interestingly, it took place in a location of an old Lido on the side of the ocean, which had fallen into disrepair for 50 years or whatever it had been.
Yeah. And
one of the local swimmers put a proposal to the local government to lease him the asset for 20, 30, 40 years, whatever it was. And he built essentially an outdoor swimming pool kind of Lido feel on the old location. Right. And it had to be, for all sorts of reasons, it had to be the same footprint of the swimming pool.
Yeah.
But the other one that is fascinating to me, and Steve, you might want to do a survey someday of which open water club in the world has the smallest shed for changing. Because I can think of 3 or 4 or 5 locations. You know, Brighton, for example, they have a room underneath the road, which for them is a palace. The Half Moon Club in Dublin has a tiny concrete structure.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't think one person could change in it, but it's their pride and joy. and Fenit on the west coast of Ireland, at high water, their structure fills with 2 feet of water. So you need to stand on the bench to change. But after you've changed, I'm not sure what you do if you've now got your shoes on, because you're in the middle of the water. But they all religiously go in there and change, and I'm thinking, why?
Yeah.
But there's an interesting pride about the swimming club that has a structure.
Yeah.
Fascinated by the small shed on the outside with a radiator.
Well, the great thing about the men's pond, Hampstead men's pond, it's called the Highgate men's pond, but it's on Hampstead Heath, is that as you'll notice in the film, that it's completely exposed. So there's no roof on it. You know, there's a 1 meter kind of sort of, I don't know what you would call it, sort of a mini shelter going around the perimeter, but there's no roof on the enclosure itself. So, there have been talks at certain points that they should, and it's also cold showers. So there have been discussions or suggestions that they should put a roof on the structure and bring in hot showers, which is generally shouted down by anyone, by the regulars. They don't want that to change. It's machismo. There's a certain thing, of this is the way it's always been, and this is why we love it, because it does sort out the men from the boys, and
if it caused twice as many people to swim in the winter, it would fundamentally change the character.
Yeah, it would. I think it was more pleasant if it was, a heated areas. I mean, the ladies have heated areas. I don't know the numbers they get in the middle of winter, but they've got a new kind of changing rooms with hot shower, and I'm not sure if there's any heating, but it's certainly a lot more comfortable than dressing out in the cold.
Well, they had the choice of heated changing rooms or a diving board, and they clearly made their choice.
Yeah.
and the other thing, which I'm sure the listeners wouldn't be aware of, is that's the one area in Britain where it never rains, so you don't really need a covered changing room, do you?
Yeah, exactly. Interesting, you're talking about the nudity earlier on, because those ladies getting changed. I must stress that if there are any women watching, it wasn't anything, it's not salacious. It was, they wanted to be filmed like that, and they suggested it. The lady, the older lady who, is topless in that shot, when we re-edited the film for the BBC, when it was broadcast on the BBC, they wanted to make it family friendly, so they suggested that we remove that scene. And I was a bit reluctant because it is quite comical. But we had to do that to make it family friendly. And when she heard about that, she hit the roof. She was so upset because she was so proud of that scene. And when she heard that it was finished up on the cutting room floor for the BBC edit, she was deeply unimpressed.
Well, I think there was something very healthy about a woman, let's say over the age of 40, who was quite comfortable with her own shape. Yeah. And I think you find that a lot in open water, whether it's male or female, that when people are changing before or after and the towel falls down, it's not the end of the world.
No.
And on and
yeah, that's right. That's when you've been in really cold water, you've really got to that point where it's transformed you. It's been so cold that you come out a different person. And there's a big thing about the film, and that's why people were so candid and the stories are so good from the various people that we talked to, is that there's just that level of honesty, and there's no hiding place when you've come out of really, really cold water. And that's why I think people have responded so well to the film.
One of the things that they all talked about is what that weekly or daily dip meant to them. And we had somebody who put it into words one time, which I think was quite appropriate. And he said, nothing in the week is as difficult as that first step into the cold water. So that, later on in the day when he has a really tough business meeting or something, he thinks to himself, well, it's not 3 degrees.
Yeah.
how tough can this be?
Yeah.
And it is, the cold water in particular is a way to absolutely clear your mind,
Yeah.
reset your body, and everything else is a little bit easier that day.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's the universal message, And when swimmers start off swimming and they decide they're going to become year-round swimmers, and they, start off swimming, they've been swimming in the summer, and they get to September, and that's when people start falling away, the part-timers, and all the part-timers have gone by the middle of October. And when they keep swimming, and they keep swimming, 2 or 3 times a week, and then they get to February, and then they get to March, and they've made it through the winter. And there's an incredible sense of achievement. And I know when I first did it, growing up in New Zealand, I was a swimmer in the cold rivers. But when you're a kid, you don't really think about things like that. You just get in the water, It's just water to you. And when I did my first winter of swimming, and I got through this, it's just like, it was a real achievement. And I that wherever I am in the world is going to be a really important part of my life. I'll be doing it for the rest of my life. I think it's a
For listeners, cold, whatever your definition is. If you live in a warm climate, cold 15 degrees Celsius. And the trick on cold water is the first swimmer dip is not comfortable. This swimmer dip is not comfortable. Now, if they're kind of a week apart or okay, and the third dip or swim going to be your regular, the third one much more comfortable. Now, if you wait a month for number 4, you have to start again.
Yeah.
But this regularity, once a week or more often than once a week, you build up a mental and physical.
Yeah.
And the mental tolerance is probably more important than the physical.
Yeah. That after 90 seconds, that initial, the gasp and the stinging feel, you're going to come out the other side.
That advice, by the way, is for people who never go in the water.
Yeah.
So if you've not been in the water for 15 years and you dive into cold water, you can get this cold water shock, they call it.
Yeah.
But if you're in every week, this is advice for somebody else. But I take it you'd be one of the people to jump or dive in, as opposed to the people who stand there and gently splash water all over themselves and slowly walk in. That's not you.
It's horrifying. When I see people, when I see people doing that, I just kind of go, oh my God, that just looks painful, especially the ones who get on the steps and they lower themselves step by step and then just sort of stand there for like 30 seconds and I can't think of anything worse. It's just
so the conventional wisdom is that when you do that, what's happening is the cold water now touching the outside of your skin, your body now starts shutting off the warm blood going to the skin. So you're now preparing yourself. Steve and I both have a colleague named Lewis Pugh.
Yes.
Who was the man who swam the length of the English Channel and in addition to the width of the English Channel. And what Lewis will tell you is that 5 minutes before he gets in, he mentally can shut off that supply of blood to the outer layer of his skin.
Right.
You do that through a type of meditation. Yeah. So it's the same kind of preparation. I personally do it through a series of nerves. I get a little bit, the butterfly starts going in my stomach, the blood comes in, and I'm typically in like you immediately. I don't splash around.
Yeah, what's your ritual before you? If you're going for a lengthy swim, how do you prepare for
it? Well, there's length and there's the cold swim.
Yeah.
So I'm fortunate enough to live in Cork, Ireland.
Yeah.
We have an island which is about 4 kilometers from where I am, and the circuit of the island is 1,600 meters. Perfect. So it's in many respects, it's a perfect course, because once you go around the corner, you're mentally committed to doing the full course. Whereas I see people swimming up and down along a beach, it seems so easy to do 4 laps instead of 10.
Yeah.
You have an ability to quit. So mine is very simple. I typically put my togs on before I leave the house. I get there, I get rid of my stuff immediately. I walk purposefully over. I get in and I go off like a rocket.
Yeah.
I feel absolutely nothing for the first 20 arm strokes, and then I realize I'm in cold water. I'm uncomfortable for the next 50, and then I get into a comfort.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I can tell the temperature of the water by the reaction of my body.
Yeah.
At 8 and 9 degrees, I get a small ice cream headache for a half a minute. Not colder than that, I don't, and not warmer than that, but it's in that temperature zone.
Right.
And the other one, which will make you smile, is there is nothing nicer in the winter than the sun. Now, somebody once described it to me, and it won't work for the American listeners, but it'll work for probably the Brits and Australians and perhaps the Kiwis. Is somebody once described it as the 3-bar fire that their granny used to have in the sitting room. And the 3-bar fire was the 3 metal bars that would heat up, and you could adjust whether you had 1 bar, 2 bar, 3 bar. And if your granny didn't have a lot of money, she would just have the light on, not any of the bars. And he said, as kids, would stand in front of the light, convinced that it was warming them up. Yeah. And he described the winter sun in Ireland, which would be the same in England, as a 3-bar fire with just the light. But the sun is lovely, and it's great that it's there, but it provides absolutely no warmth at all.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure whether it's climate change or what it is, but I would say that there have been times over particularly the last winter just gone, where I've been at the men's pond, and it's been January. It never got cold this winter in London. Never got, below 5 degrees consistently. And, there were days that I was standing, outside chatting away in January with just in my swimming costume and just basically sunbathing in the middle of January. Yeah, it's just extraordinary. The temperature would have been 10 or 11 degrees, but it's quite sheltered. So that sun coming in is actually, you can feel it. But yeah, it's very different. You'll see scenes in the film, where it's snowing, and it's just a beautiful. Those days when you get those rare days and the sun is out and it's freezing cold and you're just swimming around and you've got the sun on your face, there's no place on earth I'd rather be. And all the other swimmers feel that, when they see a day like that in January or February, they build their day around it. I've got to get to the pond. I've got to get to the pond to have that swim. Yeah.
But I'm sure I can get a reaction from you to say that you do remember last April or the April before, when it's just beautiful days, 30 days in a row, and then you went down on the second day of May, and it was the coldest day it had been in 2 months. Does that ring any bells?
Yeah. Absolutely. Look, filming the ponds was a major pain due to the weather, and the reason that is so we filmed in 2017 into 2018, and the summer of 2017 was dismal. So we had to cancel about 4 or 5 shoot days because it looked like the middle of winter, and it was like, it was just dreary and drizzling and just one of those horrible sort of English days. And so we had to cancel at least 4 shoots, probably 5 shoots. So those hot days, those really busy hot days, they were few and far between that summer. So that's not normally like that. London, normally has periods of really hot weather in the summer. And conversely, in the winter, it was really warm. So we're trying to capture, the year-round swimmers and capture the, the swimmers who are braving the ice and the snow and the sleet. And it was really, you know, it was really, really difficult because it was such a mild winter that year. And fortunately, we had the Beast from the East. It was quite a famous, you would have had that in Ireland.
Oh, yeah, we would.
Yeah. And so that fortunately came through in February 2018, and the weather was just, it was just freezing. That really sorted the hardcore swimmers out. The ones who just had to get to the pond and didn't care what conditions. One of my characters in the film is a chap called Oliver, and he comes up from South London every day, and he talks about why he swims every day. And so coming up from South London to Hampstead Heath is it's a distance of about 10 miles. He comes up on his motorbike. He's got a Harley Davidson. So he'd be coming up and in the middle of the Beast from East, losing control of his motorbike and, on the icy roads, because he was so desperate to have his swim at the pond. He had to have the swim. And one day he came a cropper on his bike, lost control, hurt his knee, he gashed his knee. He turned up, got back on his bike, turned up at the pond. And the lifeguards were going, you can't come in, you've got to go to the hospital. He still had his swim. He was so desperate to have his swim. And, that's taking obsession to the boundaries.
So if I organize 100 swimmers in Cork, Ireland, and talk to the everyman, can you arrange to get your film to us?
Oh, look, yeah, absolutely. I'll email you about that.
And how about 10 people in Eureka, California?
Yeah, look.
What can they do? How can they access the film?
Well, look, we've just released the film worldwide on Vimeo on demand.
Okay.
So if they go onto Vimeo on demand and just search for The Ponds, okay. I'm sure you'll provide a link in the description.
You better hope Steve can.
Yes.
Yeah.
I will. I will.
Thank you very much. It's currently available. It only went up last week, and I'm spending a lot of time promoting it on Vimeo. So if there are any outdoor swimmers around the world who would like to see a film about our shared passion and what it means to be, like a year-round swimmer and the community that is built up around these unusual ponds in London, then go and find it on Vimeo.
And I guarantee that everybody who watches it can relate to several of the characters and several of the pods of swimmers and go, that's Bob. That's our Bob. He's in disguise.
Yeah.
So listen, I want to thank you very much, Patrick, for your time today.
Yeah,
and we wish you all the best coming out of the COVID lockdown, and hope your summer opens up in a nice fashion for you.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for having me on the show, and it's been a pleasure.
Take care.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.